knocked on my own front door at 2:14 p.m. on a Thursday in March because the deadbolt my stepbrother installed while I was overseas didn't recognize the key I'd carried through 4 years and 2 deployments. I had landed at 6 in the morning, changed out of the uniform I wore on the flight, back into a fresh one pressed by the cleaners. Because protocol said to, and because some things couldn't wait until leave was official. The house was the first place I needed to be, before the base, before the debrief, before anything else that might delay me. The porch was unchanged. Grey composite decking I'd paid for at 25. Laid down that November after I closed on the mortgage at an interest rate that felt like theft, until it turned out to be the only good decision I would make while connected to a man who was supposed to help protect it. Craftsman pillars my father and Elias had helped restore that same month, back when Elias was the kind of stepbrother who showed up on Saturday mornings with a sander and had opinions about the right grade of sandpaper. The mailbox mounted where my grandmother's address had been hand-painted in gold leaf by a woman who had owned this house for 43 years before I bought it, whose dishes I had carefully wrapped and arranged in my kitchen cabinet the week I closed, as if touching what she had touched would teach me how to keep a home. The deadbolt was new, not replaced, installed, commercial-grade schlag, the kind you see on office suites and furnished rentals, chrome escutcheon plate that caught the 3 o'clock sun and threw it back at my face. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again. The door swung open in the hands of a man I had never seen before, holding a coffee mug printed with an inspirational quote about hustle, wearing short that meant he lived here, not visited. "Can I help you?" he said, his tone flat, the way you talk to a stranger at a business making an exchange without a receipt. I looked at him for 1 full second and didn't answer, and something in that silence made him reassess. His face changed the way a face changes when you're holding the wrong woman's door, open for an apology you've already prepared, but cannot deliver. "I'm the owner," I said. He stepped backward. The interior was dim, and the hallway arrangement was still there. 2 tables, a mirror, the tile floor I'd sealed the month before deployment. But something in the proportions was wrong. Light fell through the front room at an angle I didn't remember. Yeah, the living room had furniture that wasn't mine. Heavy, generic sectional, the kind liquidated by the pound and delivered flat-packed. A television mounted on a wall that had held nothing but paint for 4 years. The coffee table held remote controls lined up in a row, like tools laid out in a toolbox. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the laminated sheet taped to the inside of the front door frame at eye level, protected in clear plastic, printed in 14-point Arial bold. House rules, it said across the top. Below that, 11 numbered points. Quiet hours, 10p. To 8 Guest checkout procedures, different times for weekdays and weekends, which is a detail you only include if you are running something like a business. No unauthorized cooking between 6 and 7, but communal dinner preparation, smoking outside only. Please wipe feet. Each line was a small decision about how my house was being used. And they weren't my decisions. That sheet of plastic-protected paper was what changed the moment for me. Not the furniture, not the locked bedroom doors or the new deadbolt, or the people living in rooms that had been empty. It was the deliberate choice to laminate something, to protect it from weather and time and the daily friction of people moving through a space. to print it in a font size that said, "Someone spent time on the formatting." That is not accident. That is not a small thing someone does while looking after a place for a relative. That is what you do when you are building something you plan to keep. I pulled out my phone. I didn't know yet what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to document the moment before I touched anything, before the story got complicated by people explaining their generosity. The master bedroom was untouched. The bed I'd slept in before deployment still had the throw I draped it with. My books on the shelves aligned by height in the way people find compulsive, and I find honest. The closet held my civilian clothes, arranged in the order I'd planned to wear them the first week home. Nobody had moved through the master bedroom like it was theirs. It was the only room that still felt like mine. The other two bedrooms had locks on the outside of the doors. Not deadbolts, but privacy locks. The kind that come standard on rental bedrooms. The kind that show up when a space is being petitioned and rented to people who shouldn't have access to the rest of the building. I opened the first door. A man was standing at the window, holding a coffee mug, say, and he turned with the expression of someone answering an unexpected knock on an apartment door. He had a name tag on the dresser, a laptop open on the desk, a photograph of someone who looked like him taped to the wall above the bed. "Are you?" he started, and I saw the moment he reassessed what I was. "Are you actually the owner?" The word hung between us. Ownership, which had seemed permanent 6 days ago, suddenly seemed like something that needed to be established through conversation. A thing to be explained, not assumed. "Yes," I said. "Oh?" he said. He didn't move. "I thought your brother told me he owned it." I didn't know his name, didn't know his rent, didn't know how much he was paying monthly, or what his lease said, or whether it was real, or whether the whole arrangement was something someone decided to do with a property that wasn't theirs, betting that the owner wouldn't come back fast, wouldn't ask the right questions, wouldn't care enough to push back. What I knew was he didn't know I owned the house, which meant someone had told him something else. And whatever the lie was, it started with the understanding that the truth would not be defended. The second bedroom held a woman, or rather, the evidence of her, a hairbrush on the dresser, a book about productivity on the nightstand, a name tag from a healthcare system clipped to the bulletin board. Both doors locked from the outside, both bedrooms rented. Both arrangements made while I was 8,000 miles away, in a uniform that represented my commitment to a country that required me to trust people I loved, would protect the small things I had built while I was gone. I descended to the kitchen slowly. This room would tell me what I needed to know. The cabinet where my grandmother's dishes had been stored for 4 years was empty. Completely empty. Not reorganized. Not moved to another cabinet. Emptied. There was a cardboard box in the garage. There had to be. You don't throw away someone's inheritance. You move it somewhere else. You move it somewhere you can claim you were just making room. Just doing the practical thing that needed doing. And that is the story you are planning to tell when the person whose dishes they are comes home and asks where they went. I know how this sounds. I know the immediate questions. She left a key with her stepbrother while deployed. For how long? Why? Why would she trust anyone with the key to her only asset on a $48,000 a year salary? Why would she trust a man who her mother had asked her to be patient with? Who was always struggling? Who had given her no concrete reason not to believe he meant what he said about helping? I will answer every question. But first, you need to understand what I saw when I walked through that door. The laminated sheet, the specific detail of plastic protection over a house rules memo I never wrote, in someone else's handwriting, governing a space I had stopped paying attention to because the mortgage was current and I had left it in hands that had given me no reason not to trust them. That image is what changed this from family into something a person has to act on. You cannot unsee a laminated house rule sheet on your own front door. You cannot explain it away by remembering that your stepbrother was kind when you were both younger, or that he said he would help, or that you had asked him to look after things for 8 months. A laminated sheet means someone printed something. Someone made a copy to hold against weather and time. That is deliberate. That is not accident. I am a person who has been trained to assess threats and respond proportionally. I have sat in briefings about rules of engagement and casualty prevention. I have been taught that you don't move on emotion. You move on information. And that the moment you start moving on how something makes you feel instead of what it actually is, you have already lost. So I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't let my hand shake when I picked up the lease agreement sitting on the kitchen counter, the one with a signature line reading Zé Okafor, property owner, in handwriting that was not mine. I stood in my own kitchen in my own dress uniform and called my attorney at 3:30 on a Thursday afternoon. Diane Varela answered on the second ring. She was with a client, but she took the call anyway. I need help, I said. My stepbrother has been renting out my house while I was deployed. Diane was quiet for 2 seconds. Then she asked 3 specific questions. Did I have documentation that I owned the property? Did I know who was currently occupying it? And did I have any evidence that someone had made rental agreements using my name? Yes, I said to all of them. And the signatures are forged. Give me 30 minutes, she said. I'm freeing my afternoon. That was the first moment I understood that this was going to move forward. And move fast. And I was going to have to keep moving with it, or get left behind by my own life. I took 4 photographs with my phone that day, standing in my own kitchen in my own home. The empty cabinet where the dishes had been. The laminated sheet on the inside of the front door. The lease agreement with the forged signature. The cardboard box in the garage sealed with packing tape. 4 photographs. Evidence. Nothing more. Nothing less. Then I walked out of my house and locked the commercial-grade deadbolt behind me. Drove 2 miles to Diane Varela's office in a 2-story building with excellent parking and the kind of waiting room that told you nobody here was going to lose. Go do your thing, Elias said, and he wasn't talking to me like a stepbrother. He was talking to me like he had already decided to be the reliable one. It was still dark. October pre-dawn, the kind of October where the porch light is the only thing between the driveway and absolute black. My duffel was already loaded in the trunk. Elias was wearing a hoodie, the grey one that belonged to my father before the divorce. And he stood there with his hands in his pockets like he had nowhere else to be, like he had chosen to wake up at 5 a.m. I was in uniform, fresh pressed, Rank pinned, the weight of 8 months of deployment already starting to feel real now that I was dressed for it. "I'll make sure nothing burns down," he said, and he held out his hand, and I gave him the key. It was the spare key. One key. Not the ring I carried. Not the backup hidden behind the loose brick in the garage. The spare? There wasn't much negotiation because there wasn't much to negotiate. The house was empty. The mortgage was current. $1,650 a month, and I had already set up the automatic transfers, so the bank would never miss a payment, whether I was there or not. The emergency fund was $3,200 sitting in a separate account, untouched since I'd opened it, waiting for water damage or a collapsed foundation or any of the disasters that come with owning a 4-year-old house alone. I had locked the doors, drained the pipes in the guest bathroom, set the thermostat to 58 degrees to save on heating, and called the electric company to confirm that nothing needed to be done in person to keep the account active. Everything was managed. The house was managed. There was nothing for anyone to do except what I had already said. Don't let anything burn down. Elias had been struggling. My stepmother Luce had mentioned it a dozen times in phone conversations before I left. He'd lost his position at Ridgeline Logistics, the warehouse job he'd held for 6 years. And he was in that space where you're no longer the person with the job, but you're not yet the person without it, and everything feels uncertain. When I asked if he needed anything, she said what she always said, which was that Elias needed to learn to handle things on his own. But standing there on the porch with my duffel already loaded and the sun not yet thinking about rising, I wanted to be the person who offered. I wanted to be the person who could say, "Stay here if you need to. I trust you." It was a way of saying he mattered to me. It was a way of saying that even though my mother had married his father and then divorced him, even though we'd only been step-siblings for 9 years and blood siblings for 0, I saw him as someone I could depend on and someone who could be depended on. He took the key like it was something normal. "One thing," I said, "don't move my grandmother's dishes." He nodded. He was awake enough for a nod, but not awake enough for words. And I took that as agreement. Before I left, I recorded the video. This was after I dropped the duffel at the car and came back inside one last time, before the sun came up, before I actually committed to going. I pulled out my phone and started in the living room, narrating aloud, practical and slightly self-conscious, the way you are when you're talking to a camera you're planning never to watch. "Insurance purposes," I said to the phone, half joking, "for the water heater claim, or the break-in, or whatever happens while I'm gone." I was young enough to say that kind of thing, like it was protection, like naming the disaster would keep it from arriving. I panned the room, couch, coffee table, bookshelf, and all the objects on the bookshelf. The wooden box my father had made in his brief woodworking phase. The novels with their spines aligned by height. The photograph of my grandmother from 1987 when she still had the house, and the garden was full of roses. I went room by room. I narrated the master bedroom closet, describing the arrangement of my uniforms, the boxes of off-season clothing, the emergency suitcase I kept packed in case of a rapid evacuation order. I described the cabinet under the bathroom sink, paper towels, cleaning supplies, A first aid kit organized by injury type because I am the kind of person who organizes first aid kits by injury type. I narrated the kitchen, the appliances, the condition of the counters, the pull-out drawer where I keep my knives. I was thorough. 40 minutes of footage, all me alone in the house before dawn, cataloguing my own life like I was building a record of something that mattered. The last room was the kitchen cabinet. I stood in front of it, the cabinet with the glass doors on the upper left, next to the stove, and I didn't narrate for a moment. I just held the camera there, and then I started speaking. "These are my grandmother's dishes," I said, and my voice was different, quieter, like I understood I was saying something that carried weight. She had this house for 43 years. She raised my father in these rooms. She painted the mailbox with gold leaf. She taught my mother how to cook, and my mother taught me, and we use these dishes for every important meal. When she died, these dishes came to me. I am keeping them here, in this cabinet, where they will stay. I panned the camera slowly across each shelf. Blue and white porcelain, the pattern so familiar I could identify it in the dark by touch alone. Not precious in the sense of valuable. Precious in the sense of necessary. The kind of thing you protect, because protecting it is the only way you know how to say that you understood what mattered to the people who came before you. Then I turned the camera off. I told myself I was doing this for insurance purposes. I told myself that if anything ever happened to the house, I would have documentation of what had been here, what condition everything was in. If the water heater failed, I could show the insurance company that, yes, I had preserved the exact state of expensive dishes in the cabinet above the stove. If someone broke in, I could show the police what had been taken. That was the story I told myself. That was the reasonable, practical adult explanation for why I was recording 40 minutes of footage of my own house on an October morning before deployment. Narrating details no burglar would care about and no insurance adjuster would ever request. The actual reason was simpler. I was afraid of forgetting. Not forgetting the physical objects. You don't forget the dishes you use your whole life, but forgetting the feeling of being home. Afraid that 8 months would pass and I would become a person who was only a soldier. Only a uniform, only the rank, and the deployment, and the briefings. I wanted to preserve the other version of myself, the one who owned things and kept them carefully and cared about the condition of a cabinet. I wanted to come back to this video and remember that I had a life that existed when I wasn't in uniform. That my hands did things other than military work. That I had inherited something from people I loved, and I was keeping it safe. I watched the video once before I left, sitting in my car in the driveway, keys still in my hand. I watched all 40 minutes. I watched myself walk through rooms I had lived in for 4 years. I watched myself describe the location of first aid bandages and the alignment of book spines, and the exact arrangement of my grandmother's dishes. And then I put the phone in the glove compartment and drove to the base. 8 months later, I would understand that recording this video was the biggest mistake I had made yet. Not because it was the cause of anything that came after. The betrayal would have happened whether the video existed or not. But because I had created a record of what trust looked like, I had documented it. I had preserved it in high definition with my own narration. And that record would matter in ways I could not predict when I was parking at the airport at sunrise. When I still believed that the people I loved operated from the same set of values that I did. When I still believed that handing someone a key meant they would respect what was behind the door. I called Renata from the porch. My phone had no bars against the house. But out here in the open, standing in the March wind with my duffel still on the step, the signal was strong enough. "Renata, I'm at the house. I need you to come over." I didn't explain why. I couldn't explain yet because I didn't know yet. And the not knowing was worse than any explanation would have been. There was a pause on her end, and then she said she was coming. Her car pulled into the driveway 7 minutes later. She arrived still in her work clothes from the early childhood centre where she taught. Purple sneakers, a cardigan with a stain on the sleeve that she tried to cover with her hand as she approached. Like the stain mattered, like it was the important thing in this moment. Renata had always been the kind of person who worried more about what she looked like than about what was actually happening. She had a key because she'd been a real friend, the kind you give a spare to in case something happens, in case you need someone to water your plants or check on the house while you're gone. She used that key now, and the deadbolt slid open against the afternoon light. The hallway smelled wrong. That's what hit me first, before I could process anything else. The hallway was physically the same hallway. Same tile, same tables, same mirror with the small chip in the corner where my father had hit it with a toolbox. But the air was different. Coffee and something else. Something that belonged to people I had not invited into my house. The smell of occupation, the smell of tenancy. "What's going on?" Renata asked behind me. And I didn't answer because I was already moving forward, already taking in information, already building the picture. The master bedroom was untouched. The bed I'd slept in before deployment still had the throw I'd draped across it. Cream-coloured linen that my mother had criticised as impractical. The books on the shelves were aligned by height exactly as I'd left them, organised not by subject, but by spine dimension, a compulsion I had never bothered to hide. The closet held my civilian clothes, arranged in the order I'd planned to wear them on my first week home. Each outfit hanging in sequence like a calendar written in fabric. No one had moved through this room like it was theirs. It was untouched, and that fact was worse than if they had disturbed it, because it meant they understood. They understood this was mine, which meant everything they'd done in the other rooms was deliberate. "What are we looking for?" Renata asked. "You'll know," I said. The door to the first secondary bedroom was closed. I opened it. The smell hit first, coffee, and underneath it something male. Something that belonged to a specific human being who was not supposed to be here. A woman was standing in the room, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back. She had the startled expression of someone caught in a space that wasn't supposed to contain her. She said nothing. I said nothing in return. I did not want to know her name or hear her story. I closed the door and moved to the second secondary bedroom. Kevin was standing at the window when I opened the door. He turned with the expression of someone who wasn't expecting visitors. Someone who had not anticipated that the actual owner of the house would appear in his doorway. He was holding a ceramic mug, one of those blank ones you get from a bulk retailer, the kind people take to coffee shops to be filled. i.e., the kind of mug you would not casually carry around in a house you did not believe you lived in. Are you? He started, and then his eyes focused on me properly, registered the uniform, registered the weight of something in my posture that I had not yet named. Wait, are you actually the owner? The question hung between us. His tone had shifted from surprise to something else. Something like comprehension, like the moment when a story you have been told suddenly rearranges itself and becomes a different story entirely. This was the line. This was the instant I understood the full scope of what had happened. Kevin had been told something different. Kevin believed something else. Kevin had been lied to. Yes, I said, I am. But your stepbrother, he said the property was his. He said he was... How much are you paying? I interrupted. $1,400 a month. $1,400 a month for a year was $16,800. I did not let my face change. I had been trained to process information under pressure, to absorb hits and keep moving. This was a hit. And you signed a lease? Yes. He said it was standard. He said everything was legitimate. He provided. I was already past him, already moving into the hallway. I could feel Renata behind me. Feel the moment understanding began to arrive in her breathing. I descended the stairs to the kitchen. The lease agreement was on the kitchen counter, positioned like evidence, like a confession waiting to be read. The signature line read Z. Okafor, property owner, in handwriting that was not mine. Not even close. The letters were too rounded, too confident, too practiced in the act of being someone else's signature. I photographed it with my phone from multiple angles. Then I photographed it again. Sarah, Renata said, and her voice carried the weight of understanding. The garage, I said. We walked through the kitchen to the door that led to the garage. The light was dim. The air was cool and stale. And there, in the corner where I stored my seasonal decorations and my father's old tools, was a cardboard box. Large, the kind appliances come in, sealed with packing tape. Not one layer, multiple layers. 12 rolls of tape minimum, applied with systematic precision. Like someone was protecting something. Like someone was making sure nothing would escape. Like someone was making sure that when I came home, when I looked for my grandmother's dishes, I would find them safe but displaced. I approached the box. I did not open it because I already knew what was inside. But I opened it anyway because I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to confirm that the person I had given a key to, the person I had trusted with my house, had taken the one thing I had asked him not to move and had moved it. The dishes were wrapped individually in newspaper, each piece swaddled, treated with care but treated as cargo, as an object to be transported, not as something that belonged on the shelf where it had been for 4 years. The blue and white porcelain, my grandmother's dishes, the pattern I could identify by touch, the weight I could feel in my palm without thinking. Every single piece intact, but boxed up like temporary, like provisional, like they had been removed from my kitchen to make room for something else. I stood there holding a plate wrapped in yesterday's headline, and I felt something move in my chest. Not anger, not grief, not anything with a name. Clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from seeing exactly what someone has done and understanding exactly why they did it, and understanding that you cannot unsee it, cannot pretend it did not happen, cannot wait any longer to act. My stepbrother had taken my grandmother's dishes out of the cabinet and put them in a box in the garage. My stepbrother had rented out 2 bedrooms in my house to strangers. My stepbrother had forged my name on lease agreements. My stepbrother had been collecting $1,400 a month from Kevin. Almost certainly $1,400 from the woman upstairs. And keeping it, I began photographing the box from every angle. I photographed each dish as I carefully removed it from the newspaper and carried it upstairs, returning each piece to the cabinet where it belonged, where it had always belonged. I was building a record. I was doing what I had been trained to do, cataloguing facts, not emotions, not reactions, facts, evidence, the material of decisions that were about to be made. By the time I finished, Kevin had emerged from upstairs and was attempting to look casual, attempting to occupy the space like he had a right to be there, attempting to convince us through sheer force of stillness that nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I looked at him and saw not a person, but a problem. A problem that had a legal solution. A problem that was about to have consequences he had not anticipated. "How much does the other tenant pay?" I asked him. I'm not sure." "Why?" "Because you're both about to be notified that your tenancies are not valid, that you've been renting from someone who has no authority to rent this property, that the lease you signed was forged." His face cycled through confusion and then understanding and then fear. I watched it happen. I did not feel satisfaction watching it. I felt only the momentum of what had to come next. "What do you mean? Your stepbrother said—" "My stepbrother does not own this house," I said. "I do. And I did not authorize either of your tenancies." Renata was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, her hand covering her mouth. I pulled out my phone. I was still in uniform. My rank was still pinned to my chest. My hands were steady when I scrolled through my contacts and found the number for Diane Varela. Attorney at law. Real estate and landlord-tenant disputes. A name that Luss had mentioned once and that I had written down without quite knowing why. Without quite understanding that I would be the one calling. The phone rang twice before she answered. "Diane Varela's office," the receptionist said. "I need to speak with Diane Varela. This is urgent." "Ms. Varela is with a client. I can take a message." "Tell her I own a house. Tell her someone has been renting it out without my permission. Tell her there's a forged signature on the lease agreement. Tell her I have documents. Tell her I'm a staff sergeant with the United States Army and I do not make decisions lightly." There was a pause on the other end. A long one. Then the receptionist said, "One moment, please." Diane Varela came on the line. Her voice was crisp, professional, fast, like someone who understood that speed and precision were the language of people who meant business. She asked 3 questions. Do you have documentation that you own the property? Do you know who has been occupying it? Do you have the lease agreement? I answered yes to all of them. She told me not to touch anything else. She told me not to confront the tenants beyond what I had already done. She told me not to sign anything, not to make any promises, not to negotiate. She told me to photograph everything, every room, every lease, every document I could find. Then she said, "Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. Bring everything you have. We're going to move fast." She hung up. I was standing on my own driveway, in my own uniform, holding a forged lease in my hand, with my neighbour 3 feet away and a stepbrother somewhere in the world, still believing he had done something reasonable, still believing he had done something that made sense. I did not believe the same thing anymore. Diane Varella's conference room had a view of the downtown skyline and a mahogany table that could seat 14 people. We were the only ones at it. 2 days had passed since I'd called her from my driveway, since Kevin and the woman upstairs had received their notices, since Elias had stopped answering his phone. Diane had spent those 2 days doing what lawyers do, building a case from documents. Now she was laying them out across the table like a story written in receipts and bank statements and forged signatures. She started with the property records. County records, printouts from a database I had not known existed, showing the chain of title going back through previous owners, showing my name on the deed, showing that I had purchased the house 4 years ago at $187,500, showing that I had a 30-year mortgage at 4.75% interest, showing that the property was collateralized to First National Bank and held as security for the loan. These were facts that established what I already knew. I owned the house. But seeing it rendered in official typography, in the language of county government, gave the fact a different weight. It became not an assumption, but a record. So it became something that could not be argued with. Something that existed independent of what anyone claimed. Something that was true, whether Elias believed it or not. "This is you," Diane said, pointing at my name on the title. "This is the legal proof of ownership. Now look at what your stepbrother did with it." She pulled out a notarized form, a property management authorization document, dated October 15th, 6 months into my deployment, signed in Elias's handwriting and embossed with a notary's seal from a company I'd never heard of. The form granted Elias full authority to manage the property on behalf of the owner, to collect rent, to enter into lease agreements, to make necessary repairs, to advertise the property as available for rental, to deposit rent payments into accounts of his choosing, to retain portions of collected rent for management fees. All of it executed on behalf of someone named Ziz Okafor, property owner, someone named me. "This is the second forged document," Diane said, sliding it across the table so I could see the signature line clearly. "The first one is the lease agreement we found in your kitchen. This one is more serious because it's notarized. It carries the seal of a state official. It's also what he used to apply to the rental platform. He submitted this form when he created the listing. He told them he had documented authority from the owner to manage the property. This form made him look legitimate." I looked at the notary stamp. The date was clear. October 15th, 2024. I had been deployed for exactly 6 weeks. I had been in a training facility in Georgia, standing in a classroom with 300 other soldiers, learning protocols I would need to know by heart. While I was doing that, Elias had gone to a notary public and forged my name on a document that claimed I had given him the authority to rent out my house. How did he get it notarized? I asked. Doesn't a notary have to verify identity? Technically, yes, Diane said. The notary is supposed to verify that the person signing is actually the person whose name appears on the signature line. In theory, your stepbrother could not have gone to a notary and claimed to be you. But in practice, notaries don't always do their due diligence. Some of them are careless. Some of them don't ask the right questions. I've already filed a complaint with the state notary board. But for our case, what matters is that he did it, he went to the effort, he made the decision to create this document and have it notarized. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't him being confused about who owned the property. This was him taking deliberate steps to establish authority to do exactly what he was planning to do. She turned to her laptop and pulled up the bank records. No, these were the records Elias had submitted to the rental platform to prove he was a legitimate landlord. These showed deposits coming in and going out. The movement of money. Every transaction he made over the 8-month period, I was deployed. The paper trail of his operation. Look at the deposits, Diane said, and she highlighted a column in yellow. Deposits ranging from $1,400 to $2,800, arriving monthly, deposited into an account in Elias Garza's name. 8 months of deposits. $1,400, $2,800, $1,400, $2,800, $1,400, $2,800, $1,400, $2,800. The pattern was obvious. 2 tenants, 2 different rates, 2 different deposits arriving on different days of the month. That's $22,400 total, Diane said. That's the complete amount collected over the 8 months you were deployed. Every penny came from your house, your property, your tenants. Even though your tenants didn't know they were renting from you, they thought they were renting from him. I was looking at the numbers. $22,400. That was more than half of my annual base pay. That was the entire emergency fund I had built. Multiplied by 7, that was a down payment on a car, or a year of mortgage payments, or the kind of amount that makes the difference between financial stability and financial vulnerability. Now look at the outgoing, Diane said, and she pulled up another spreadsheet. Outgoing payments, each one labeled mortgage payment in the memo line, $1,650 each month. 8 times, once a month, like clockwork. $13,200 paid out to First National Bank. He paid the mortgage? I asked. 8 months of mortgage payments, Diane confirmed. Every single month. Right on schedule. $13,200 total. I did the math anyway, even though I already knew the answer. 22,400 minus 13,200 equals 9,200. That was what he kept. That was what he had decided was his commission for being my stepbrother, for the effort of forging my name, for the trouble of deceiving 2 people into renting rooms in my house. $9,200 that he extracted from my property while I was 8,000 miles away. He kept $9,200, Diane said, in case I had missed the implication. That's the net profit. That's what he walked away with if he had simply stopped. If the only money in question was what he collected and what he kept. But that was not the only money in question. Diane opened another file. Bank statements from the rental platform's payment processor. A different account. A business account. Something called Z, Okafor Property Management Cell LLC. A company that did not exist. A company that had never been registered with the state. A company that had been invented entirely for the purpose of receiving payments that were meant for me. This account was created using your name, Diane said, pointing at the screen. The rental platform sends payments here. They send them with an account labeled Owner Disbursement. They send them because your stepbrother told them that was the correct account, that was where you wanted the money to go. The platform has no reason to doubt him. He submitted your notarized authorization form. He provided documentation. He looked legitimate. I was looking at my name on the screen. Zul Okafor. Owner disbursement. Payments that were meant for me. Payments that were labeled as mine. Payments that had gone to an account I could not access. An account I did not know existed. An account that Elias had created and managed entirely without my knowledge. I did not speak for a long time. This was the moment Diane had been waiting for. The moment where the full scope of the operation became clear. This was not just about the rented rooms or the forged lease. This was about a systematic extraction of funds that bore my name, that were labeled as mine, that were designed to look like they came from the property I owned, but that went into an account controlled entirely by Elias Garza. Diane did not fill the silence. She did not offer explanations or reassurances, or the kind of platitudes that people offer when they are trying to make someone feel better about a betrayal. She just sat there, and I sat there, and the magnitude of what I was looking at began to settle into me like something physical, something with actual weight. This was not a mistake. This was not a misunderstanding. This was him taking deliberate steps, multiple steps, steps that required planning and documentation and the willingness to create false accounts and forge documents and to put my name on forms that he knew were fraudulent. Steps that required him to believe that I would not come home for 8 months. Steps that required him to believe that even if I did come home, even if I discovered what he had done, I would not pursue it because he was family. I need to see all of it, I said finally. My voice was steady. That was what I would remember later, that my voice did not shake, that my hands did not shake, that my composure did not break, even as I was looking at evidence of a betrayal that was calculated and deliberate. Diane nodded. She had anticipated this. She had files organized by month, by transaction type, by account holder. She had the lease agreements, both of them, both forged, both signed by tenants who believed they were renting from a legitimate landlord named Elias Garza. She had the notarized property management form. She had screenshots from the rental platform showing the listing as it appeared when Elias created it, complete with photographs of my house that he had taken without my knowledge. Descriptions of my rooms using language that was not mine. Pricing information that I had never approved. She had documentation of the security deposits. $1,400 per tenant. $2,800 total, collected by Elias and deposited into an account in his name. Security deposits that were supposed to be held in escrow by law, that were supposed to be protected and separated from a landlord's personal funds, that were instead being held by someone who had no authority to hold them, in an account that was not registered as a rental trust account, in clear violation of state law. These deposits are illegal, Diane said, pulling up the relevant statute and highlighting the language. State law is very clear. Landlords are required to deposit security deposits into an escrow account within a specific time frame and to maintain them separately from their personal funds. They have to disclose the location of the escrow account to the tenant. Your stepbrother did none of these things. He took the deposits and deposited them into his personal account. That's a separate violation. I was absorbing this information the way a soldier absorbs a briefing, without emotion, with total focus. Understanding that the facts in front of me were going to determine what happened next. I had seen the house, I had seen the evidence, I had called the attorney, I had confronted Kevin and the woman upstairs. But this documentation, this paper trail, this level of deliberate deception executed across multiple platforms and accounts and forged documents. This was different. This was not something I could unsee. This was not something I could rationalize. This was not something that admitted of forgiveness, because forgiveness implied accident. And this was not accidental. What are my options? I asked. Diane leaned back in her chair. You have several. Civilly. You can pursue breach of trust, conversion of property, unjust enrichment. You can pursue recovery of the full $22,400 he collected, or the net profit of $9,200 plus the $2,800 in security deposits. Criminally, you can file a complaint with the district attorney regarding the forged documents. You can pursue both civil and criminal remedies simultaneously. Or you can negotiate a settlement. What would a settlement look like? I asked. A return of the funds he collected, minus the legitimate expenses he incurred on your behalf. That's the $13,200 in mortgage payments he made, so he would owe you $9,200, plus the $2,800 in security deposits to return to the tenants. That's $12,000 total. $12,000. That was significant. That was money I could use. That was money that might compensate for the violation of my trust, and the theft of my property, and the operation of a fraudulent rental scheme using my name. What if I don't want to negotiate? I asked. Then we file. We file the civil action for damages and the criminal complaint with the district attorney. It takes longer. It's more adversarial. It's more expensive. But you don't have to trust his willingness to cooperate. You don't have to believe his promises. You just have to present the evidence and let the legal system decide what consequences are appropriate. I was looking at the bank records again. My name on payments I never received. My signature forged on documents I never signed. My house being managed by someone who had decided that access and trust were the same thing as authority. When can we file? I asked. Diane smiled. I can have the civil filings ready by tomorrow afternoon, the criminal complaint by the end of the week. I stood up. I did not remember deciding to stand up, but my legs were no longer willing to sit in stillness while I absorbed what I was looking at. I walked to the window. The downtown skyline was visible from her conference room, all glass and steel and permanence. My house was not visible from here, but it was real. It existed in county records. It existed in my name. It existed in a chain of title that could not be erased or rewritten or claimed by someone else. No matter how much Elias had convinced himself that he had authority. File everything, I said. The civil action, the criminal complaint, all of it. You're sure? Diane asked. I turned back to her. I was sure. This was the moment where I could have talked myself out of it. This was the moment where I could have decided that family loyalty mattered more than facts. This was the moment where I could have taken the $12,000 and moved forward with the assumption that the situation was resolved. I could have decided that. It would have been easier. I did not. He knew what he was doing. I said, he knew my name on those documents was not my signature. He knew he did not have authority to manage the property. He knew the law required him to hold the security deposits in escrow. He knew all of it, and he did it anyway, because he believed that I would either not come home, or I would come home and not pursue it because he was family. He was wrong about that. He was wrong about me. Diane nodded. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing. I'll need copies of your military ID, she said. Documentation of your deployment, the video walkthrough you recorded before you left, and your authorization to subpoena the rental platform for any additional records they have. I gave her all of it. I authorized her to file. I authorized her to subpoena. I authorized her to pursue every legal avenue available to hold Elias Garza accountable for what he had taken from me, what he had done with my name, what he had decided was reasonable to extract from someone he had called family. And then I left her office and drove home to a house that was legally mine, but temporarily occupied by people who believed it belonged to someone else. I still had 2 tenants to deal with. I still had a 30-day notice period to observe. I still had to wait for the legal machinery to turn, system created entirely by someone who had decided that my trust was permission to steal from me. That moment had given me clarity. And clarity was worth more than family loyalty extended past the point where it made sense. Clarity meant action. Action meant consequences. And consequences were the only language my stepbrother seemed to understand. The notice to quit was a single page. Diane had drafted it in the language of the law. Clinical and absolute. You are hereby required to vacate the premises within 30 days of receipt of this notice. Certified copies went to Elias and both tenants the next morning. The legal clock started at 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday, the time the mail carrier scanned the first certified letter at the post office downtown. I did not wait for Elias to receive his copy. I drove to his apartment that same evening, 2 miles from my house, in a complex called Riverside Meadows, which had no river and no meadows and which seemed to exist primarily to house people who were moving down instead of up. Elias had taken a 1-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor, which Luce had mentioned once in passing, with the kind of tone that suggested she was embarrassed on his behalf. I had not asked more questions. I had not wanted to know the details of his life after he lost the warehouse job. Now I understood. He needed an address that was not my address, a place to operate his rental scheme without actually being present at the property he was managing. He was a landlord, and landlords did not have to live in the houses they rented out. He could sit in this 1-bedroom apartment 2 miles away and collect rent from my house and submit documentation to the rental platform and manage everything remotely, and never have to see the people he was deceiving or confront the scope of what he was doing. I parked in the visitor lot and climbed the exterior stairs to the 2nd floor. Unit 247. I could hear a television through the door. Something with a laugh track. Something designed to fill the silence of a 1-bedroom apartment. I could smell cooking. Something with garlic. something that suggested he had been home for a while. I knocked. I waited. I heard the television being muted, the sound of footsteps, the door opening. Elias was still in the clothes he wore to whatever he did with his days. Jeans, a t-shirt with a small stain on the front, socks without shoes. He had not been expecting me. His face cycled through several expressions in quick succession. Surprise, then something that looked like calculation, then something that looked like the preparation of a defense. He was trying to assemble an argument even before I had given him the opportunity to speak. "You don't understand what I was doing for you," he said before I could speak. I had come prepared for many things. I had come prepared for anger, for denial, for the kind of deflection that people use when they are caught doing something they know is wrong. But this assumption that I did not understand, his generosity, this conviction that his violation of my trust was actually a form of care, this belief that I was somehow too naive or too young to understand the practical realities of what had been done, this was different. This was the moment I saw clearly what Elias actually believed about himself. He believed that taking my house and renting out 2 rooms was helping me. He believed that managing my property without my permission was a form of service. He believed that keeping $9,200 for himself was a reasonable fee for this service that I had never asked for and never wanted. He believed that the money he had extracted from my property, from my name, from my trust, was somehow justified. "I understand exactly what you were doing. Stealing from me." The words hung between us. Elias did not move. He did not argue or defend himself or try to reframe what had happened into something that sounded more charitable. He just stood there in the doorway of his apartment, in the clothes he had worn to his non-job at his imaginary management company, understanding finally that I was not going to let him keep the narrative he had constructed around his own actions. "I have the documents," I said. "The forged authorization form, the lease agreements, the bank records showing the $22,400 you collected, and the $13,200 in mortgage payments you made, and the $9,200 you kept. My attorney is filing a civil action for damages, and the forged documents have been referred to the district attorney's office as a potential fraud matter." Elias's face went very still. The casual expression that he had been maintaining, the expression of someone who was about to launch into an explanation, a justification, an appeal to family loyalty, collapsed. What was left underneath was fear. "Criminal charges?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. And this was the distinction I would explain to Diane later. The distinction that would matter more than anything else that happened in the coming weeks. "That depends on how this goes. You have 30 days to vacate the property. You have that time to make a decision about whether you want to settle this civilly or whether you want to let it proceed to the criminal systems." I did not wait for a response. I turned and walked down the stairs, past the open doors of other apartments where other people were living their lives, unaware that they were within earshot of the moment when someone's entire legal future shifted. I drove back to my house, which was still legally mine, which was still occupied by people who believed it belonged to someone else, which was still waiting for the legal machinery to process everything that had been done to it. Diane had explained the strategy to me that morning, in language that was careful and precise. Using the criminal referral as leverage was different from pursuing criminal charges. This distinction was everything. A criminal charge meant going to a prosecutor, presenting evidence, letting the state decide whether to press charges. It meant that I was no longer in control of the outcome. The prosecutor would make the decision. The prosecutor would decide whether the evidence was sufficient, whether the case was worth pursuing, whether the crime was serious enough to warrant the time and resources of the criminal system. It meant that if Elias was charged and convicted, he would have a permanent record, a felony conviction, consequences that extended far beyond civil damages. But it also meant that I had no ability to negotiate or settle. Once the criminal system was engaged, it followed its own trajectory. I could not offer a deal. I could not decide to forgive him or accept his apologies or let him off the hook. The state would pursue the case or not, based on its own assessment of the evidence and the public interest. A civil settlement, on the other hand, meant negotiating between lawyers, meant reaching an agreement about damages, meant that I maintained control. I could decide to accept a settlement at any point. I could decide to pursue the criminal charges or not. Depending on what Elias offered in settlement, the threat of criminal charges was only valuable if I was willing to follow through on it. But the mere existence of the threat, the fact that I had referred the forged documents to the district attorney, that was leverage. That was the weight that would press down on Elias in the middle of the night when he was lying in his one-bedroom apartment, realizing what he had done. "I'm filing the civil action tomorrow," Diane said. "The criminal referral has already been submitted. The district attorney's office will take 3 to 6 months to decide whether to prosecute. That's fine. That's actually good for you. It gives him time to understand the severity of what's happened. It gives him time to think about whether he wants to risk a criminal conviction or whether he wants to settle with you civilly. Most people will choose settlement when they understand that the alternative is a felony conviction." I understood what she was not saying, what she was letting me understand without stating directly. The fact of the criminal referral was a negotiating tool. It was the thing that would make Elias choose a settlement over trial. It was the thing that would make him understand that he could not simply wait this out or convince me that his version of events was the true one. The law did not care about his version of events. The law cared about the documents, the forged signatures, the money trail, the evidence. The law was dispassionate. It did not care whether we were family. It did not care whether his intentions had been generous or selfish. The law only cared about what he had done. By the end of the first week, Kevin Salter was gone. He had packed his belongings in boxes that he stacked in the hallway. And he had moved out voluntarily, which meant I did not have to wait for the 30-day notice period to expire. Which meant that one of the rooms was empty and starting to look like the room it had been before Elias had decided to rent it. The bed frame was gone. The dresser was gone. The room was pale and empty in the afternoon light, and it looked like a room that had been waiting for someone to claim it again. He left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter, the paper torn from a notebook, the handwriting careful and slightly self-conscious. "I'm sorry I didn't ask more questions before signing the lease. I should have verified that the person renting to me was actually authorized to do so. I did not realize that the property was being rented fraudulently, and that the person I thought was the landlord was actually committing a crime. I have vacated the premises immediately. I am not pursuing any claim against the owner or the person I rented from. I understand that the security deposit I gave was held illegally, and I am not expecting to recover it. I hope you can get this resolved. Kevin Salter. The note was signed, which surprised me. He had added his name, which meant he was willing to stand behind what he had written, which meant he understood that he was apologizing not just for his own mistake, but for being party to a fraud, even unknowingly. He was the kind of person who would move out without protest when he discovered what had happened. He was the kind of person who would write a handwritten note of apology to a woman he had never met and did not owe anything to. He was, in other words, operating from a different set of values than Elias. He had made a mistake, but the mistake was correctable, and he was correcting it. He was choosing to do the right thing, not because he was forced to, but because he understood that it was the right thing. The woman in the other room did not leave. She did not answer my knock on her door. She did not respond to the certified mail that Diane sent her. She seemed to have decided that if she ignored the problem long enough, the problem would resolve itself, or that the legal system would take care of it, or that she could simply wait out the 30 days and move at the last moment. I did not have the energy to pursue her individually. Diane said she would deal with it through the eviction process, if necessary. Kevin's departure meant that at least one of the tenants understood that the situation was not something she could remain part of. That was enough. What I was focused on was Elias. What I was focused on was the 30-day clock that was now running. The clock that Diane had started when she sent the certified notice to quit. What I was focused on was the choice he would have to make. He could fight the eviction, which would mean going to court, which would mean the case would proceed, which would mean that the criminal referral would be sitting there in the district attorney's office waiting to be acted upon. Or he could settle, which would mean negotiating with Diane, which would mean figuring out what amount of money would make him willing to accept that he had lost, that he could not keep the narrative he had constructed, that the money he had taken was money he would have to return. Diane sent him the demand letter 1 week after the notice to quit was filed. The demand was for the full amount, $22,400 collected, minus the $13,200 in mortgage payments he had made, for a net of $9,200 owed plus the $2,800 in security deposits, for a total of $12,000. The letter also demanded that he reimburse me for the cost of the attorney's fees, which by that point had reached $3,500. The letter explained that if he did not respond within 10 days with a settlement proposal, Diane would proceed with filing the civil suit and would also be filing a motion to refer the forged documents to the district attorney as part of the eviction proceedings, which would ensure that the criminal referral was not just sitting in a file, but was being actively pursued in the context of the civil case. Diane also explained to me, in a separate meeting, that this was the moment where the psychology of the situation changed. Elias had 3 weeks to vacate. Elias now knew that there was a criminal referral sitting in the district attorney's office. Elias now understood that I was willing to pursue legal action. The question was whether he was willing to settle or whether he was going to force this to trial. Settlement was cheaper for him. Settlement was faster for him. Settlement was also an admission that he had done something wrong. And Elias, for all his talk about generosity and family obligation, did not seem like the kind of person who was ready to admit that he had done something wrong. He'll settle, Diane said. And she was saying it with the certainty of someone who had seen this movie before, and who had watched dozens of people discover that they had underestimated the people they had wronged, who had watched the moment when the weight of the legal system finally pressed down hard enough that denial was no longer possible. He'll negotiate a bit. He'll try to reduce the amount, but he'll settle. Nobody wants to go to trial when they know they're going to lose. I was not as certain as Diane was. Elias had convinced himself that he was doing something generous. Elias had forged documents and stolen money and managed to believe that this was all somehow in service of family obligation. Elias was, in other words, either deeply delusional or deeply committed to his own version of the story, or maybe both. But what I did know was that the 30-day clock was running, and at the end of 30 days, he would lose the legal right to occupy my house. At the end of 30 days, the law would be on my side, regardless of whether Elias believed he had done something wrong. That was the thing about the law. It did not require Elias's belief. It did not require his agreement or his acceptance or his willingness to acknowledge what he had done. The law required only that I had the deed, that I had the evidence, that I had followed the proper procedures. The law required only that the document showed what they showed, that the money trail showed what it showed, that the forged signatures were forged. The law did not care whether Elias understood that he had done something wrong. The law only cared about the facts. And I had all of them. You can't do this to him, Luce said, and her voice was the voice of someone who had been practicing what to say since the moment she'd opened the certified letter. I was in my kitchen. The coffee I had made 20 minutes ago was going cold on the counter, untouched, because Luce had called at 8:47, ma'am. And I had answered. And now I was standing in my own house, listening to my stepmother explain why I was wrong to pursue legal action against my stepbrother. I'm not doing anything to him, I said. He's doing this to himself. He was trying to help you, Luce said. Her tone shifted into the careful, measured voice of someone who has prepared this argument. He was managing your property. He was making sure it didn't sit empty while you were deployed. He was keeping up with your mortgage payments. He was protecting an asset that you left unprotected. And now you're humiliating him with legal notices and attorneys and criminal referrals. He was stealing from me, I said. My voice was flat. There was no point in inflection. Luce had already decided what this was, and no amount of tone on my end would change her mind. He was not stealing. He was managing. He was making practical decisions in a situation where you were not there to manage it yourself. That's what family does. Family steps in when there's a need. This was the family's position. Elias had done something generous. Elias had protected my investment. Elias had taken on a burden that I had not asked him to take. And now I was repaying him with legal action. The fact that he had forged documents and stolen $9,200 was, in Luce's narrative, a detail that did not rise to the level of moral significance. What rose to moral significance was that I was willing to pursue it, that I was willing to treat my family like a legal problem instead of a family problem. He forged my name on multiple documents, I said. He created accounts using my name. He collected money that belonged to me and kept most of it for himself. That's not managing. That's fraud. That's because you weren't there, Les said, and her voice was taking on a sharper edge now. That's because someone had to make decisions, and you weren't there to make them. Elias did the best he could with a difficult situation. I left instructions, I said. One instruction. Don't move my grandmother's dishes. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long pause. Long enough that I understood something. Luce knew. Luce knew that the dishes had been moved. Luce knew what that meant. Luce was choosing not to address it directly. Was choosing to move past it. Was choosing to reframe it as something other than what it was. Your family, Luce said finally, and her voice had softened, which meant the hardness was coming. Family doesn't pursue legal action against family. Family works things out. Family forgives. I was standing in my kitchen, in my house, which I owned, which I had paid for with my own money, which I had worked for since I was 25 years old. I was standing in front of the cabinet where my grandmother's dishes were supposed to be, and they were not there because my stepbrother had removed them to make room for renters. Maiga. And my stepmother was calling me to tell me that pursuing legal action against this was a betrayal of family. Then I guess I'm not family, I said. Don't say that, Luce said, and her voice changed again. It became something softer, something that sounded almost like grief, but I had learned by then not to trust the softness in Luce's voice, because the softness was always in service of something harder underneath. The softness was the technique. The hardness was the goal. I'm not saying it as a statement of emotion, I said. I'm saying it as an observation. If defending my own property from theft makes me not family, then I'm not family. You're being cruel, Luce said. You're being cruel to your stepbrother, who was only trying to help. You're being cruel to me by forcing me to choose between my son and my stepdaughter. I did not respond immediately. I was looking at the empty shelf. I was looking at the place where the blue and white porcelain should have been. I was looking at the proof that Elias had felt comfortable enough in my house to remove the one thing I had asked him not to remove. I was looking at the evidence that when I said, don't, he heard, do. You don't have to choose, I said finally. You can love him and still acknowledge what he did. You can support him and still accept that he committed fraud. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not that simple, Luce said. It actually is, I said. You're making it complicated because you don't want to accept that he did something wrong. But he did. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make you feel better about it. The call ended shortly after. Luce did not call back that day, but she texted the next morning. Come to dinner. Let's talk about this. Let's figure this out as a family. I did not respond. The next day, I asked Luce to come to my house. I told her I wanted to show her something. I told her it was important. She came in the afternoon, and I could see the hope on her face, the belief that this was a reconciliation, that I was going to back down, that I was going to find a way to forgive what could not be forgiven. I set my phone flat on the kitchen table. I pressed play on the video I had recorded 8 months ago, the morning before I left for deployment. The camera panned slowly through the living room, across the hallway, into the master bedroom, into the bathroom, into the kitchen. And then it reached the kitchen cabinet. The glass doors catching the light. The blue and white porcelain arranged on each shelf. my voice calm and slightly self-conscious, describing what I was looking at. These are my grandmother's dishes. She had this house for 43 years. She raised my father in these rooms. She painted the mailbox with gold leaf. She taught my mother how to cook. And my mother taught me. And we used these dishes for every important meal. When she died, these dishes came to me. I am keeping them here, in this cabinet, where they will stay. Luce was watching. She was watching the camera pan slowly across each shelf, showing the exact condition and placement of every piece of porcelain. She was watching the proof that I had documented my house and my dishes and my instructions before I left. She was watching the evidence that I had been meticulous and careful and had done everything right. And then the camera reached the cabinet, and Luce stopped watching. She did not turn away from the phone. She did not stand up and walk out. She just stopped watching. Her eyes moved away from the screen. Her body remained at the table, but her attention was gone. I did not turn off the video. I let it continue. I let the camera linger on the cabinet. I let my own voice continue describing the dishes, the inheritance, the intention to protect them. I let the silence of the room fill with the sound of my voice playing to no audience. What I remember about that moment is not Luz's face. It was not her expression, or her tears, or her reaction. It was the sound of the room. It was the sound of Luz's breathing becoming shallow and quick. It was the sound of my voice continuing on the video, describing the meaning of the dishes, while Luz was no longer listening. It was the sound of her hand moving to grip the edge of the table, her knuckles going white. It was the sound of her knees shifting under the table, her body preparing to leave, but her will not yet strong enough to make her stand. It was the sound of the phone continuing to play, continuing to deliver the truth that Luz was no longer willing to receive. The video ended. The kitchen was silent. Luz was still sitting at the table, her hands flat on the surface, her eyes fixed on something that was not the phone. Not me. Not the kitchen in front of her. She was looking at something inside herself, something that she had constructed a narrative to avoid looking at, and the narrative had just collapsed. "I can't," Luz said finally. Her voice was barely audible. "I can't accept that he would do this. He's my son." "He did it," I said. "Whether you accept it or not, he did it." "He said he was helping," Luz said. "He said he was protecting your investment." "I don't care what he said," I replied. "I care what he did. And what he did was remove my grandmother's dishes from my cabinet to make room for strangers paying him money. What he did was forge my name on legal documents. What he did was steal from me." Luz stood up. She moved toward the door with the slow movements of someone who had been aged by information she did not want to possess. "I need to speak with him," she said. "That's between you and him," I said. "I'm done speaking." She left without saying goodbye. She did not look back. She did not offer an apology or a promise to talk further or any of the words that people offer when they are trying to repair a relationship. She just left. And I was alone in my kitchen. And the cabinet behind me was still empty, still waiting for the dishes that would return to it once the legal process was complete. This was the all is lost moment. Not because I was losing the legal case. I was winning the legal case, but because I was losing the family, because standing in my own house, defending my own property, protecting my own grandmother's inheritance, all of it meant that I was no longer part of the family I had grown up in. Luce could not hold both truths at the same time, that Elias was her son, and that Elias had done something wrong. She chose to hold the first one and reject me for insisting on the second. And I was okay with that. I was standing in my own kitchen, in my own house, with all the evidence on my side and all the law on my side, and I was completely alone. But I was not going to negotiate that solitude. I was not going to say, okay, fine, I'll forgive him to make Luce feel better. I was not going to become the kind of woman who accepted theft because it came from family. Drop the case, and I'll give you the $9,200, Elias said, and there was something in his voice that suggested he believed this was a reasonable offer, that he believed this was how these things worked, that if he simply returned what he had stolen, the problem would resolve itself and we could all move forward. It was 8:15 on a Wednesday. The hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Thursday morning. Diane had sent me a final email at 6 p.m. reviewing the strategy, confirming that all the documents were ready, asking if I had any last-minute questions. I did not. I was as ready as I would ever be. It was. Elias was calling because he understood, finally, that he was going to lose. Walk me through this, I said. I was standing in my kitchen. The cabinet above the sink was still empty. The dishes had been returned to me by the attorney's office 2 weeks ago, and I had left them in their boxes, untouched, because I wanted to wait until this was over, wanted to wait until the legal process had run its course, wanted to install them on the shelf only after I had won. The $9,200. I'll transfer it to your account. You drop the case. You tell the judge tomorrow that it's been settled, and this is over. Everyone walks away. No court hearing, no public record, no more of this. There was a quality to his voice that I recognized. It was the voice of someone who had convinced himself that money could solve anything, that financial restitution was the only thing that mattered. That if he simply returned what he had taken, we could pretend that the taking had never happened. So you're admitting that you kept $9,200? I said. I'm offering to return it, he said. That's what matters. That's what you wanted. I wanted you to not forge my name on documents, I said. I wanted you to not create accounts using my identity. I wanted you to not rent out my house without my permission. I wanted you to not move my grandmother's dishes from the cabinet where they belonged. But since you did all of those things, yes, returning the money is the bare minimum of what's required. So you'll take it, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice, the belief that this was ending, that I was backing down, that we were finally reaching the moment where this could be over. I haven't decided, I said. Zara, I'm offering you money. I'm making this right. Where are the dishes? I asked him. He did not answer. He did not say, they're in a box, or they're being held, or I don't know where they are. He did not offer an explanation, or a justification, or a reason. He simply did not answer. And in that silence, I understood everything. He understood that the dishes were the symbol. He understood that returning the money did not address the violation. He understood that offering me $9,200 was an attempt to reduce what had happened to a financial transaction. When what had happened was a betrayal of a specific instruction, a removal of something that was not his to remove, a violation of a trust that could not be repaired with a bank transfer. "I'm not dropping the case," I said. "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "I made a mistake 8 months ago when I gave you a key. I'm not making any more mistakes. I hung up. I set the phone on the counter and did not pick it up again. I did not respond to the text messages that followed. I did not acknowledge the voicemail he left at 11:47 p.m. asking me to reconsider, pleading with me to think about the family. I went to bed at midnight and lay in the dark for hours, understanding that what was about to happen in the morning was necessary, and that being necessary did not make it any less painful. The courthouse was a grey building downtown, the kind of building that had housed justice for decades in a way that was efficient and dispassionate. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected, more intimate, which somehow made it feel more consequential. The judge's bench was elevated. The tables for the attorneys were arranged so that they faced the judge but angled toward each other. Elias sat at one table with his attorney, a man in a suit who looked like he had been practicing property law since the 1990s and who had the tired expression of someone who had learned long ago not to judge his clients too harshly. Diane sat at the other table. The court reporter was at her machine. There were no spectators. This was not a high-profile case. This was not important to anyone except the people in the room. The judge explained the parameters of the case. She explained what we were disputing. She explained what evidence had been submitted. She explained that I was the documented owner of the property, according to county records. She explained that Elias had submitted documents bearing my signature that had been determined to be forged. She explained that he had created accounts in my name without authorization and had collected rental payments totaling $22,400 and deposited them into those accounts. Elias's attorney stood and began his argument. He was careful and measured. He argued that Elias had been acting in good faith, that there was no criminal intent, that Elias had genuinely believed he was helping. He argued that Elias had taken on the responsibility of property management while I was deployed overseas, and that this responsibility had required making practical decisions about how to manage the property and the income generated from it. He pointed to the mortgage payments. He emphasized the $13,200 that Elias had paid toward my mortgage over the 8-month deployment. He said that any reasonable person could see that Elias had been trying to help, that Elias had been trying to protect the property from sitting empty, that the mortgage payments were evidence of his intent to be helpful rather than harmful. "The defendant," he said, "is guilty of perhaps being overzealous in his attempt to manage the property. He is guilty of not understanding all the legal requirements of being a property manager. But he is not guilty of fraud. He is not guilty of theft. He is a young man who is trying to help his family, and now he is being prosecuted as if he were a criminal." Diane stood. She was wearing black. She was carrying a folder. She opened it and laid out the documents one by one on the judge's bench as she spoke. The notarized property management authorization form, showing Elias's signature and my forged name, the 2 lease agreements, both signed by tenants who believed they were renting from a legitimate landlord, the bank statements showing the deposits from the rental platform, each one bearing the exact amounts that corresponded to the rent from each room. $1,400 and $2,800, arriving monthly like clockwork. The bank statement showing the unescrowed security deposits sitting in Elias's personal account, instead of being held in a legally required trust account. The screenshot from the rental platform showing the listing that Elias had created, complete with photographs of my house and descriptions of the rooms. The defendant has argued good faith, Diane said. But good faith does not explain forged documents. Good faith does not explain creating accounts without authorization. Good faith does not explain building a website, listing for a property that does not belong to you, and collecting money from tenants based on lies about who owns that property. The defendant made deliberate choices to establish authority he did not have. He made deliberate choices to collect money on behalf of someone else. He made deliberate choices to keep a portion of that money. That is not good faith. That is fraud. That is theft. She showed the judge the math. $22,400 collected, minus $13,200 paid toward the mortgage, equals $9,200 kept. $9,200 in pure profit that Elias had extracted from the property and the tenants and the violation of the owner's trust. The defendant offers to return the money. Diane continued, but money is not the only thing that has been taken. The owner's name has been forged on legal documents. Her identity has been used to create accounts. Her property has been rented out without her knowledge or permission. Her trust has been violated, and her security deposits, the $2,800 that should have been held in escrow for the tenants, are sitting in a personal account that the defendant controls. These are not matters that can be resolved by a bank transfer. The judge listened. She took notes. She asked questions. She asked Elias's attorney how he explained the forged signature. He said it was a clerical error. The judge pointed out that notaries do not correct signatures. She asked how he explained the unescrowed security deposits. He said Elias did not understand the legal requirements. The judge pointed out that ignorance of the law is not a defense. She asked how he explained the $9,200 in net profit. He said Elias believed he was entitled to a management fee for his work. What work? The judge asked. Did the defendant perform any maintenance on the property? Did he respond to tenant complaints? Did he make repairs? The defendant managed the property remotely, the attorney said. From where? The judge asked. From his residence, the attorney said. And the owner was where? The judge asked. Deployed overseas with the United States Army, Diane said. When it came time for closing arguments, Diane was brief. The evidence is clear. The defendant forged the owner's signature on multiple documents. He created accounts without authorization. He collected rental payments and partially retained them for his own use. He violated state law regarding the handling of security deposits. He violated the owner's trust and used her property for his own financial gain. The owner has suffered damages in the amount of $12,000, which includes the $9,200 profit that the defendant kept and the $2,800 in security deposits that he held illegally. The court should award those damages and order the defendant to vacate the property immediately. The judge took a 30-minute break. She returned and read her ruling from the bench, her voice steady and clear. I find that the defendant, Elias Garza, deliberately created and submitted forged documents bearing the property owner's name without authorization. I find that he collected rental payments totaling $22,400 and deposited them into accounts bearing the owner's name without the owner's knowledge or permission. I find that he retained $9,200 of that amount for his own use. I find that he collected security deposits from tenants and deposited them into a personal account in violation of state law requiring such deposits to be held in escrow. I find that the defendant acted with full knowledge that he did not have the authority to do any of these things. I find that the defendant's argument of good faith is not supported by the evidence. Accordingly, I award damages to the plaintiff in the amount of $12,000, which includes restitution of the net profit and the illegally held security deposits. I further order the defendant to vacate the property within 30 days and to return all keys and access codes to the property to the plaintiff. I order the defendant to pay the plaintiff's attorney fees in the amount of $3,500. This judgment is final. The gavel came down. It was the sound of something closing. It was the sound of a decision made. It was the sound of a judge saying that what Elias had done was wrong, that what Elias had done was against the law, that what Elias had done had consequences. I was not watching the judge when the gavel came down. I was watching Elias. He was watching me. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and in that moment, I saw something in his face that I had not expected to see. I saw that he understood, finally, completely, irrevocably, that he had lost. I saw that he understood that his narrative, that he was helping, that he was protecting, that he was being practical, that narrative had been demolished by evidence and law and a judge's decision. I saw that he understood that there was no way to reframe this anymore. No way to convince me that what he had done was reasonable. No way to appeal to family loyalty or shared history. What I felt when our eyes met across that courtroom was cold. Outside the courthouse, Diane told me that the judgment was in my favor and that Elias would have to comply with the order. She told me that if he did not pay the $12,000 within 30 days, we could move to garnish his wages. She told me that I had won. I nodded. I said, "Thank you." I shook her hand, but what I was actually feeling was not the feeling of winning. What I was actually feeling was the understanding that I had just closed a door that I could never open again. The family I'd grown up in was gone. Luce would not forgive me. Elias would not acknowledge what he had done. I would return to a house that was mine in law, but that had been violated by someone I had trusted, and no amount of money, no judgment from a judge, no validation from the legal system could repair that. I understood, standing outside the courthouse in the sunlight, that this was what justice looked like sometimes. Not vindication, not triumph, not a moment of satisfaction and closure. Sometimes justice looked like standing alone, holding a piece of paper that said, "You were right," knowing that being right had cost you everything you thought you had. The second tenant vacated on day 31 of the notice period. She left the key on the kitchen counter and a forwarding address for her security deposit, which I was legally obligated to return within the time frame specified by state law. She did not leave a note. She did not explain her departure. She simply removed herself from the situation and let the legal process continue without her. In a way, I respected her for that. She had been deceived about who owned the property, had signed a lease with someone who had no authority to rent. And once she understood the situation, she made the choice to leave. She had been part of what happened to me, but she had not been the cause of it. The $9,200 from Elias's civil judgment came through 62 days after the ruling, a bank transfer that appeared in my account on a Tuesday morning in July. The money arrived with the clinical efficiency of the legal system. It was deposited by the court, moved from Elias's bank account to mine by the machinery of the law, without drama or negotiation or the kind of personal conversation that might have accompanied the money if this had been an agreement between family members. It arrived, and I received it, and my house was paid for by someone who had stolen from it. By that point, the hearing was already fading into the kind of memory that felt like something I'd read about rather than lived through. The judge's ruling had been clear. The payment was inevitable. The legal process had done what the legal process was designed to do. It had established facts, determined liability, and imposed consequences. Diane had sent me a final invoice. I had paid her. The case was closed. The question of criminal charges was different. The forged documents had been referred to the district attorney's office as a potential fraud matter, and I had the option to pursue the case or to allow it to close. Diane had explained the options in clinical terms, laying out the timeline, the likely outcome, the commitment required from me to see it through to a conviction. "Most people pursue it," she had said. "They want the criminal record. They want to see the person convicted." "What do you recommend?" I had asked. "That depends on what you want," she had said. "A criminal conviction will give you a permanent record of what he did. But it will also require you to testify, to be available for depositions, to remain involved in the case for another year or more. A civil judgment gives you the financial restitution and the acknowledgement that what he did was fraud. If you pursue criminal charges and he's convicted, you have both. But you also have an additional year of your life tied up in this situation." I had thought about it for 3 days. Then I had called her back and told her not to pursue it. "Some people asked me why," Diane asked, with the clinical curiosity of a lawyer trying to understand her client's priorities. My mother asked, with the emotional confusion of someone who believed that maximum punishment was the only appropriate response to betrayal. Oh, Luce did not ask, because Luce and I were no longer on speaking terms, and by that point, I had accepted that this was the cost of being willing to defend myself against someone she loved. I explained it the same way each time. A criminal conviction would not give me back my house. It would not restore the relationship I had lost. It would not undo what had been done. What it would do was extend this process further, would require me to participate in depositions and court appearances, would keep the wound open while the criminal system did its work. The civil judgment had given me what I needed, acknowledgement that what had been done was wrong, documented in a court record, and money that compensated for the violation. That would have to be enough. The Saturday after the check cleared, I drove to the house in the morning, before it was hot, before the day had taken on the weight of other people's expectations. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment in the silence of the car, understanding that I was about to do something that required only stillness and intention and time. I was not angry anymore. The anger had burned through itself months ago. I was simply going to restore what had been taken. The garage door opened with a sound I had not heard in 9 months. It was the grinding sound of the door mechanism, the particular metallic quality of something moving on tracks. The garage was dim and cool, the temperature slightly lower than the outside air, the smell of stored things and old oil, and the particular mustiness of a space that is not frequently entered. The cardboard box was still in the corner, where Renata and I had left it that first afternoon, still sealed with packing tape, still waiting. The tape was dusty now, and the box had begun to sag slightly at the corners from the weight of the dishes and the humidity of the season. I brought the box inside. I set it on the kitchen counter, the same counter where I had found the forged lease 9 months ago. I found scissors and cut through the tape. The box opened, and the smell of September released into the kitchen. It was the smell of old newspaper, of ink, of pages that had been in storage. The dishes were wrapped in newsprint from September 14th. The date on one section showed the day before I left for deployment. The newspaper had been the packing material Elias had used to protect them while he moved them to the garage. I unwrapped the first dish carefully, peeling back the layers of newsprint. It was a salad plate, the glaze catching the light the way it always did, the pattern as familiar as my own hands. I carried it to the cabinet. I placed it on the shelf where it belonged. I unwrapped the second dish. It was a bowl, larger than the plates. With the same pattern, I carried it to the cabinet. I unwrapped the third dish. It was a dinner plate. I carried it to the cabinet. I did this for an hour, one piece at a time, not hurrying, not rushing through the task, simply unwrapping each dish from its newspaper, carrying it across the kitchen, and placing it on the shelf in the cabinet, where it had been for 4 years before Elias removed it, and where it would remain now. The salad plates came first, arranged by size, then the dinner plates, stacked carefully so they would not shift, then the bowls, placed so the pattern showed clearly through the glass cabinet doors. Then the serving dishes, the cream pitcher that my grandmother had used at every family meal I could remember, the sugar bowl, the platter that was large enough to hold a whole roasted chicken, each piece placed on the shelf in its proper place. When I was halfway through, Renata knocked on the back door. She was holding 2 paper cups of coffee, one in each hand, steam rising from the opening. She did not say anything about why she was there or how she had known to come. She simply set the coffee on the counter and watched while I continued unwrapping and placing. She did not offer to help. She did not offer commentary about what she was seeing or ask questions about how I was feeling. She simply stood in the kitchen with me while I restored what had been taken. She drank her coffee slowly, and when mine began to cool, she took the empty cup and set it aside. By noon, the box was empty. Every dish was on the shelf. Every piece of my inheritance was back where it belonged. The cabinet looked exactly the way it had looked on the morning I had recorded the video 8 months ago. The arrangement was identical. The spacing between the pieces was identical. The light caught the glaze of the porcelain the same way. The only difference was that I had lived through 9 months of betrayal and legal process and family estrangement to get back to this exact moment. I pulled out my phone. I opened the camera. I took a photograph of the cabinet, showing all the shelves, showing all the dishes arranged in their exact places. I adjusted the angle to match the angle of the video I had recorded so long ago. I set the focus precisely on the shelf where the dishes were arranged. I made sure the light was right. I took another photograph, then another, until I had one that matched the framing of the video exactly. I opened my phone's photo library. I found the folder that still contained the screenshots I had saved from the video in September. The images of the cabinet as it had been before Elias moved the dishes. I created a new folder labeled Coming Home. I uploaded the photograph I had just taken. Then I opened the video file. I scrolled to the moment where the camera was showing the cabinet exactly as it had been and screenshotted that moment. I saved that screenshot to the same folder. 2 images, the same shelf, the same arrangement, the same light, 9 months apart. The photographs did not explain anything. They did not describe what had happened or how I had fixed it. They simply showed the before and after of a cabinet. They were the evidence of restoration. They were the proof that what had been taken could be returned. I looked at the 2 images side by side on my phone screen, and I felt something settle. Not peace exactly. Not satisfaction or closure or any of the emotional states that people talk about when they are trying to turn betrayal into a growth opportunity. But a kind of completion. A kind of verification that what had been documented had been confirmed. Renata was still standing in the kitchen. Her coffee was cold. She had not tried to engage me in conversation or ask me how I felt or offer the kind of comfort that requires words. She had simply been present. And now that the work was done, she seemed to understand that it was time for her to leave. "I am glad," she said finally. It was the first thing she had said all morning. "Thank you for being here," I replied. She nodded, and she left through the back door the same way she had come in. And I was alone in my kitchen with my dishes on their shelf and the weight of 9 months of betrayal sitting somewhere behind me. Not forgotten, but no longer occupying the space in front of me. I have the receipt. I have the video. I have the deed. Those 3 things don't require anyone's good intentions to stay true.